So Chapter 2, Key Issue 3, talks about population growth varying among regions. And one way we measure population growth and the differences between regions is using the demographic transition model. The demographic transition model has 4 stages, and these stages explain how the natural increase rate in a country rises or falls. Historically, no country has ever gone backwards to a different stage, as of yet. So the model can also be thought to have a beginning, a middle, and kind of an end. But we don't know the model. It is possible, I guess, in the future for a country to go backwards. But right now, no one has. So they've gone from stage 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5. So right now, there's no country that has retreated backwards. So when you look at the demographic transition model, you have 3 different line graphs on the same graph. So you have the birth rate. So you've got the crude birth rate per thousand, the birth per thousand graphed, and this one is in red, but the lines are always labeled. They could be different colors. And so you can see birth rate is high here and then low, but overall a trend that's pretty high. In stage 2, the birth rate stays high. It declines in stage 3, and then it stabilizes in stage 4. You also have the death rate graphed. The death rate, the number of deaths per thousand, is also really, really high in stage 1, but then it starts to decline in stage 2. So it's declining in stage 2, it continues to decline throughout stage 3, and then it stabilizes in stage 4. And it might even go up a bit because people are living to older ages. And then you have the natural increase rate. The natural increase rate tells you what's going on with the population overall. So it's just like you did the calculation, birth rate minus death rate. And so when you have a high birth rate, but you also have a high death rate, your population stays stable and it doesn't grow fast. So it's stable and it's growing slowly. But when your death rate starts to decline, like here in stage 2, the population increases rapidly. And then as the birth rate starts to decline, the natural increase rate starts to decline. And then here, it levels off back to low growth because the crude birth rate and death rate are about the same again. So stage 1 has a very high birth rate, has a very high death rate. It has a low natural increase because so many people are dying. And it's usually this way because of lack of access to medical care. So people are dying of diseases that are pretty easily treated today. There's no country that's in stage 1. So there's no whole country in the world that's a stage 1 growth rate. It's also called pre-industrial growth rates. We've all been in stage 1. So if you thought about people in the U.S. when they first came over here, like Revolutionary War. If you're thinking of like the Middle Ages, if you're thinking of mostly tribal groups throughout like sub-Saharan Africa, that's all stage 1. Low population growth. The population stays about the same. You might find within a country like a tribe or a subset of the population that has a stage 1 pattern, but again, no country is stage 1. The demographic transition model, then stage 2, or the transitional stage, is a period of rapid growth, so high growth or expanding growth. So what happened again is the crude death rates declined. So the crude death rates declined, which means the high level of birth leads to a high natural increase rate, just like if you had done the calculations. Most of Europe and the United States entered stage 2 during the Industrial Revolution. So when we had access to more food and we had rapid advances in medical care. Asia, Africa, and Latin America entered stage 2 around 1950. And again, that was because of improved medical care. So when you think of like a developing country today, the nations that are struggling the most are here in stage 2. So their populations are growing really fast. And part of it is just culturally you haven't caught up to. So you don't have medical care, and culturally you haven't really adapted to the greater frequency with which your children survive infancy and childhood. Stage 3 is known as the industrial phase or the moderate growth phase. And in stage 3, birth rate starts to decline. Death rate is still declining, so the natural increase rate is moderate. The gap is going to be narrower between crude birth rate and crude death rate in stage 3. So in stage 3, people are having less children. They have access to medical care. They know their kids are going to survive. Maybe they have access to family planning. The population is growing, but it's growing slowly. So most European countries in North America were in stage 3 during the first half of the 20th century. Those semi-peripheral countries are probably either in stage 3 or entering stage 4 about now. And so if you're thinking about a country that's still classified maybe as a less developed country, but has a lot of modern conveniences, at least in its urban areas, it's probably stage 3. Stage 4 is low growth. So you have very, very low birth rates, you have low death rates. There's no long-term natural increase, possibly a small decrease in population. That's where the U.S. is in general right now. We talked about how there are more people dying in the U.S. than being born, and mostly, dying from like chronic diseases associated with old age. This stage is also known as zero population growth, and it really just means that your population is going to stay constant, which is good. So the U.S. is in this stage in general, if you look at birth and death rates, but we have a high rate of immigration in our country, and that high rate of immigration means that our population pyramid looks more like a stage 3. So we're definitely in stage 4 of the demographic transition model, but our population pyramids sometimes look like one that's a little earlier because of migration, which is good. Like a young country is good, and we'll talk about that. And then we have the demographic transition stage 5, which is characterized by a low birth rate and increasing death rate. And so you have more elderly than young people, which means your natural increase rate is actually negative. Over time, there's less young women who are having children. And you've got some European countries that have a negative natural increase rate. So Russia has a negative population growth, or it's declining. Poland, Japan, Denmark. So there's a lot of countries that are struggling with their population size. And so they really need to have more immigration to make sure they have enough workforce, because we talked about that dependency ratio, right? So the dependency ratio is really, really high in stage 5, and it starts to get high in stage 4. How do you lower the birth rates? You want to improve education and healthcare. So as you make your way through this transition as a country, the key to moving from one stage to the next is to control birth rate. So education and healthcare are correlated to declining birth rates. And again, your birth rates are declining because people are having less children, they're having healthier children, and they're able to take care of those children. So it's not about you can live in a country and have many children as an individual choice, and that doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong or you're making the country, slide backwards. It's just the ability to take care of your children and the ability to choose how many kids you're going to have. And so education means that you have hopefully better access to better jobs. The more education people have, there's usually better economic conditions. You're more likely to have access to healthcare if you improve education as a whole in a country, because you have more healthcare providers. When you educate women in particular, birth rate declines because women then are able to get jobs and have control over their own money. And if women are going to high school, that means they don't have their first children until, they're about 18. That's later than some women have their first children in other countries right now. If a woman's college educated, now she's in her 20s before she starts having children. And so if you have children later in life as a woman, you're also going to have less of them. Like, it's just a matter of math at that point. So improving education for women in particular leads to a decline in birth rates. And again, declining birth rates is a positive thing for a country, particularly if it's, has a really high population growth rate. And then access to contraception. So we're not just looking at general healthcare, we're looking at contraceptive healthcare and education about it. So women are able to access it. Women are legally able to access it, and women have the knowledge to seek out the best type of contraception for them. Culturally, it does go against some religious beliefs. So again, like contraception doesn't mean that every person in the country or that culture has to have it or use it, but it needs to be available, and women should know, and men, they should know how it works and what's available so they can make their own choice. So individually, when people are ready to start a family in any culture, they should certainly have the right to choose whether or not they're going to use contraception, how many children they want to have. But access to healthcare, access to reproductive healthcare, these things are essential to the development of a country. If you look at this map here, it shows you the percent of women using family planning. And if you flip back in your textbook and look at where populations are growing really fast, you'll notice, like here we go in Central Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa, below 25% of women are using family planning, and they have a really, really high natural increase rate. So same thing here over here in Pakistan, which has a high NIR. It says about 25% of women are using contraceptive. They have a really high NIR. So these things are pretty well correlated. If you look at the population pyramids for the world as a whole, our world is getting less young. So this is a rapidly growing country, right? This is a country that's stable, and this is a country that's moving into that declining population. So here you'd have a country probably in that stage 2, maybe moving into stage 3 because it's narrowing. Now you have a country here that's in stage 4. This would be a stage 5 country. Why does population growth vary among regions? Again, we're going to look at some theories about that. So we have Malthus. Malthus claimed that the population was growing faster than the increase in food supply. Malthus wrote, he was alive during the Industrial Revolution in England, and he was very grim. He did talk about how we had exponential growth in our population, which we did. And it started during the Industrial Revolution. So these are the first people to notice it. And it's scary when you start to notice how fast the population is growing. And populations grow exponentially. And he said that food grows arithmetically. So remember we talked about like 3 plus 3 is way smaller. That's arithmetic growth. And 3 to the third power, that's exponential growth. So he said that food would be like, 3 plus 3, that's its growth rate. And population was exponentially growing, so 3 to the third power. And so that people were going to outstrip the food supply. Malthus' theory is based on the idea that the world's supply of resources is fixed rather than expanding. And, in some ways, he's right. Many of our resources are fixed, but we have many cultural innovations that allow us to access them resources better or use them more wisely. So like the amount of land is fixed, but we have innovations in farming that let the same acreage of land grow more crops. So Malthus we didn't quite die out as quick as Malthus thought we would. Some people say that it's not the population increase, it's the problem. If you have enough economic growth, a larger population can support more, as long as it has a strong economy, a large population can support more people. Again, food production has increased over the last 50 years because of technical innovation. So, we haven't run out of food yet. Really, we just don't have equal distribution of food. And his model predicted that world population would have quadrupled over the course of the next 50 years. But what happened with Malthus also is there were innovations in healthcare, there were innovations in reproductive healthcare, education for women, and so all these other factors came in. If the world had stayed across the entire world, if it had stayed like the Industrial Revolution in England, he would have been right. But luckily we had lots of cultural innovations and technological innovations that meant his glum predictions did not quite come to pass. But you should know about Malthus. He really started the study of modern population growth in the world, and you need to know about him.